Hello, everyone, and welcome to Chapter 12. In Chapter 12, we're going to take a look at really East Asia and Southeast Asia. This is going to be our one chapter where we mainly focus on the empires and cultures of Asia. We'll touch on many other different cultures from this area throughout the year in sections or in parts of sections and in various activities. But this is the one time that we actually focus solely on what certain cultures across Asia do. So in this first section, as you guys can see, we're going to focus on China. In particular, we're going to focus on two very significant dynasties, the Tang and Song. So let's get started. So to kind of set the stage for you guys, one of the most important dynasties in Chinese history was the Han Dynasty. It's took place in the years before we actually start this course, and collapsed kind of around 80 or CE 220. And there's a lot of comparisons to the fall of the Han Dynasty with the fall of the Western Roman Empire, but that's something for another course. If you guys take AP World History, we talk quite a bit about that, or at least we did until the reorganization. So after the Han Dynasty falls, really over the next 350 to 400 years, you've got a number of dynasties that rise and fall that don't last very long. Some last longer than others, but pretty much it's kind of a very fluid situation in who's really controlling China at this time. So what happens is in the year 589, Emperor Wendy is important because he's able to unite northern and southern China and kind of end this rising and falling of all these dynasties that are moving back and forth. So from this point, under Wendy, China is going to go on and experience a golden age under these next two dynasties. It doesn't mean that there's always going to be peace and prosperity throughout the entire time, because you're going to have one dynasty fall and another rise, but in general, between these next two, you're going to have a golden age for China itself. All right, so one thing that we have to talk about first that actually lends itself to allowing a golden age to take place under the Tang and eventually the Song is you need to understand what the Grand Canal is. So the Grand Canal was a canal system that was built between just outside of Beijing all the way to Hangzhou. And this is important because it allows for the transportation of goods between North and South China, as well as connecting the Huanghe and Xianjiang rivers, which flow east and west. So now you have an actual waterway that not only allows the flowing of goods from really the northern part of China to the southern and vice versa, but you can connect to two of the main rivers that flow east and west, either out to the Yellow Sea or to the west into the continent. So those are really, really important to help creating trade, kind of almost like a national trade network, if you will. Now, this was a very extensive project. As you can see on the map, that's a long way for that canal to be dug. It took 5 years and over 1 million people to construct the canal, and thousands of people died from the labor on this canal. It was very harsh work, very hard work, and at the same time, the Chinese were also constructing or improving various parts of the Great Wall. So you have a huge force of labor in China tasked to these two projects. And that's a problem because these people, because of how difficult it is, you're going to see that the peasants themselves are going to uprise or challenge the rule of the Chinese authority at various times because of just these conditions, as well as many other factors as well. So what happens is in 618, the Sui, who were in control of China at the time, that emperor is assassinated because the peasants are upset with the conditions they're living under. All right, so here's a couple pictures of the Grand Canal itself till to this day. You can kind of see it across the countryside. It's used very effectively in China even now, and allows for trade and transportation of goods from the north and south by water. All right, so we're going to talk about Tang expansion here. So we see that the Tang come into power and they're able to reconquer significant portions of land to the north and to the west, mostly lands that were lost by the Han Dynasty, or that were under control of the Han Dynasty when it was at its height. They also go into Korea, and we'll talk about Korea at the end of this into this chapter in section 5 a little bit more to kind of connect this to here. So make sure you guys remember that Korea, we talk about it specifically at the end, but it also has connections here at the beginning. Now, moving on from their conquering of lands, the first and only real true Chinese emperor in history, Wu Zhao, is of Tang origin. She's very, very important for you guys to understand because of her status as the only female emperor in Chinese history. Wu Zhao is right here in the upper left-hand corner. Now, further traits of the Tang Dynasty that you need to remember. The first one is pretty self-explanatory to really any culture that we talk about in history. If they're doing well, is generally they're promoting trade, in this case foreign trade, and they have advances in farming to help feed the population. And that's very, very important in China because of the number of people they have. The second trait is China is really, really big, controlling a huge amount of territory, different scopes and different cultures and all that stuff that are there. So they actually developed the use of scholar officials to help manage the empire itself. And off of that, the Chinese use kind of a merit-based system. A lot of these officials and people in higher up places in China are gaining these positions as scholar officials or even higher positions through ability, not necessarily through class. It's not a completely perfect system, but it is a huge benefit over many others because you have people that are actually capable and skilled in the positions that they're in. And what this does is it not only helps organize Chinese society to be much more effective and have control over the land a lot easier, but it creates a very capable governing class and wider experience through government, even from the local positions up to the empirical positions as well. All right, here you can see the Tang Dynasty at its greatest extent. Now, covers much of China. We don't have the expansions here to the north a little bit because there's some vassal states and into Korea. We have some expansions into northern Vietnam. Now, this kind of arm that goes out, there's a reason for that. That's the Silk Road trade routes. That's the Tang trying to have control and protection over their trade routes with the cultures to the west. All right, so the Tang rises and falls. So it's a very, very big empire, as you can see on that map on the previous slide. It means that you need a lot of money for really everything: defense, infrastructure, whatever. Okay, so by the mid-700s, the Tang are issuing high numbers of taxes to maintain the empire itself in any number of means. Now, they don't cover the needed costs. It's becoming very hard on the people. You also add in the fact that you have outside cultures banging on the doorstep, in particular Muslims. The Muslim empire has expanded in various forms to the gates of the Chinese realm, and a Muslim army is able to defeat a Tang army at Talas. Now, this is significant because it means that the Muslims now control Central Asia, and it's significant for two reasons. One, for the Muslims, it means they have greater control of the Silk Road trade routes, and they have a better control of being the middleman between East Asia and particularly China and that of Europe and Africa. And then two, it's important for the Chinese because it means now they've lost more of a control on an economic venture in a time that they need it, because the high costs are something they need to try to offset, and they're already struggling with that. Now, it's going to be a slow decline from this defeat to really when it ends, because in 907, over 150 years later, is really when the Tang Dynasty effectively ends, when rebels go into the capital city of Chang'an, they murder the emperor and burn the city to the ground. Now, this is where we're going to switch to the Song Dynasty. So we're going to have a brief kind of period of warring states going on in China for about 30-40 years. But by 960, Taizu is able to reunite northern, southern China and start what's known as the Song dynasty. And the Song dynasty is going to be a very, very stable and powerful empire, but it's going to be transitioning to a little bit, it's going to be a little bit different than what we saw with the Tang in previous dynasties in Chinese history, like the Han. And the reason for that is because they're going to lose territory to a group to the north called the Jin. And effectively, when they lose that territory in the 1100s, really the Song only control southern China. Now, that's important because it means that their capital has to move. The political center is going to change. So they move the capital to Hangzhou, which you can see here is on the coast. And this is going to be important because even though they've failed militarily, the Song dynasty is going to be able to be very powerful because of the position of their capital. Hangzhou, it's on the sea or very close to it, and they're going to flourish economically and become a very strong trading dynasty for Chinese history, because not only do they have access to the resources of southern China, which are important, and they can trade westwards and to the south as well, but now they have to worry or focus economically to the sea. They can focus more on that, and they become much more centered on trading in using the oceans, and that's a benefit for them. All right, so this is a very important slide. I want you guys to come back to this. We're going to write a little paper, plus there's going to be some essays towards the test that are going to be linked to this, so this is a very important one to come back to, both for the Tang and Song. But all the prosperity in China during the Tang and Song dynasties is going to lead to a lot of advancements. First, you have advancements in agricultural technology, so that means China is going to be able to double its population. So they're going to go to nearly over 100 million people. They're going to be the only place in the world that has a number of cities that have over 1 million people in them that reside there. That's significant for this time period, where today it's pretty normal to have several cities that have over millions of people all across the globe. But also outside of agriculture, you're going to have inventions in other places as well. In particular, movable type. Movable type, think of it as like block printing, and where you move the actual blocks themselves, put oil or put ink on them, and then you can actually print. Makes it much easier to actually print stuff. It's not like a printing press, like what we'll see with Gutenberg, but it's kind of the precursor to that, in what we see today even. So that's an important step in terms of printing, particularly when you look at the Chinese writing system. That's a big thing. Gunpowder is going to get developed during this time period, and obviously we know why, gunpowder is going to become important. Its impact is going to be great, really, in a lot of different areas, but particularly militarily for expansion purposes as we move forward. We also, other advancements in porcelain. That's a huge trade good. We call it fine china, really, because where it comes from here. The Chinese use paper money. That's significant because it just the size and scope of the empire, number of people. You can't necessarily back everything directly by gold or silver, so that's an important stage economically here, and going to become a precursor to the paper money that we have today across the world. They developed the magnetic compass, which obviously the magnetic compass is going to be used for significant advancements in exploration and expansion. And then from an educational standpoint, we have advancements in arithmetic and algebra through connections with other cultures along the Silk Road, particularly that of India and the Muslim cultures. The Chinese are going to develop the use of negative numbers at this point, and that's going to spread itself out through the field of math all across the globe as we move through history here. So these are very, very important innovations and inventions and advancements here that you need to remember. All right. Some further innovations. This is going to tie back with the previous slide, so please make sure you look at both of these when studying and reviewing for this test. Agricultural, we kind of already talked about with a boost in population. One of the reasons why that was able to boost so much is the Chinese were able to start or develop a faster ripening rice through modifications and in experimentation, which means they could actually farm 2 crops of rice a year. And rice is a very high caloric food source, so that's a huge benefit. Again, that allows for rapid population expansion. Um, the expansion of trade and foreign contact not only brings in innovations, but it allows money um, and resources to come in. And you have to combine that with previous advancement we just talked about on the previous slide, like the compass, greater international trade. We'll see that a lot more when we talk in chapter 19, when we talk about Chinese influence and expansion through trade under Zheng He. So that'll come back to it. So they're um, prospering greatly through this trade and foreign contact during this period. And all of this, what this does, these connections and expansions in prosperity means that the Chinese wealth and culture is going to spread throughout this entire region. It's going to spread to East Asia, so places like China, or excuse me, Japan, Korea, and Vietnam, to the Islamic lands, to Central Asia and the Middle East, and all the way to the West as well, in Africa. So this cultural diffusion is going to have a huge benefit for China, as well as other cultures, like we'll see really throughout this chapter, in what others like Japan and Korea in particular, what they take away from Chinese contact with the Chinese. All right, here's these maps. We've actually seen these before previously in chapters 10 and 11. This is just kind of remind you what the Silk Road routes were, or the main routes were, in China being the eastern focus of it, and then obviously Constantinople and the Middle East being the western focus of the Silk Road routes, whether by land or sea. Okay, just a couple more slides here. Poetry and art. This is a common theme. Again, I've mentioned this before. We're going to see it much more when we get to the Renaissance, or something that you're more familiar with in terms of this prosperity. In a more of a more famous example, but anytime cultures are doing well, prosperity takes hold, you're going to see advancements in cultural things like education, and in particular art and poetry, because people now have the ability to actually do that and make a living off of it, and not have to just worry about the essentials such as food. So we see that significant advancements in poetry happen during this time. In particular, Li Bo and Tu Fu become really the two main popular Chinese poets. We'll actually read a brief poem by Tu Fu, and you guys will develop your own poetry linking to the Chinese system. So to kind of see that, typically these two poets linked back to previous Chinese traditions and ways of life, in particular that of those developed by Confucius, which we don't really spend too much of a time looking at here in this course. You would in a previous course or an AP if you decide to take that. But we'll kind of look at the ways of Chinese poetry here. Also, Chinese art is going to be very based in beauty, in particular looking at real life things and landscapes. They don't use typically many colors, and really utilize just black ink. And this is going to be something that we'll look at a little bit later, where there's a similar form of art that develops in Japan. It looks very similar for a variety of reasons, but the real big difference between the two is, if you're trying to decide which one's Chinese and which one's Japanese, typically the Chinese one is going to be less colorful and really just using black ink, as you can see here on the screen. All right, changes in society during the Tang and Song dynasties. You're going to see society becoming more mobile. What does that mean? It means that people are going to be able to move up classes, or at least have a better chance of being able to come up out of the lower classes. You're going to see more people moving to cities because of the advancements in agriculture. It means that you can have less people farming and doing other things, such as art or poetry, and still being able to maintain the food that you need to maintain that population, or even have it grow. The scholarly officials that are created within these dynasties mean that you have a greater wealthy class, or gentry class, that's created, that is much more powerful, more educated. Because of all these advancements, the ability of people to move to cities, and the prosperity, you have a strong middle class that's developed. This is primarily focused on artists or artisans, and merchants, so people that are creating goods as well as trading them. And then your lower class are your laborers, people that worked on things like the Great Canal or Grand Canal and the Great Wall of China. And then your servants and soldiers would kind of round out that lower class. All right, this is our last slide here. So the role of women is important to understand in Chinese culture at this time and moving forward. Women are subservient to men, something that we've actually seen in several different cultures or changing in cultures moving forward. Like we talked about with the Islam, the women actually started off with a pretty prominent role, and as things changed, they lost some of their prominence within that culture. Same thing with Christianity as well, or in Christian cultures. Um, you see this happened here with China. Peasant women actually have more equality within Chinese culture at this time than um, more wealthier middle class women, and it's mainly just for the fact that peasant women had to work to provide for the family. It didn't necessarily mean that they weren't subservient, it just they faced more equality because they had to survive. The people had to survive, whether men or women. Now, not all upper class women, but a significant number of upper class women. It was a cultural trait in China for a long period of time to have your feet bound at a very young age. Think of it as like a corset for your feet, and you'd slowly tighten it over time. And basically, what would happen, you can see it in this picture. And you can look up some of your other pictures for yourself. They're pretty gruesome, as you can tell this one is. That would actually bind the feet and slowly break down the bones and structure of the feet to kind of turn in on itself. As you can see that these toes have turned in underneath, and it would cripple women for their life. I mean, you wouldn't be able to walk, but that was a cultural trait and cultural focus that many in the upper classes of Chinese culture viewed as a number of things, as a form of status and so forth. All right, that's all I got for you. Sorry, this is one of the longer lectures we have for the year. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions, let me know, and I will see you guys later. Take it easy.